This is a video I wasn't sure whether I wanted to make, but, you know, it's quite topical and it's something that occurred in my country. So if you are somebody who cares about left-wing, right-wing, feminism, anti-feminism, social justice warrior versus anti-social justice warrior YouTube, boring! You'll already be familiar with these two individuals, Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux. Basically, they are right-wing, some say hard-right, some say alt-light, some say alt-right thinkers and philosophers and so forth, who have controversial opinions, particularly around race.
And then below that, you start to get sub-Saharan blacks, 70. There are pygmies in the high 50s, low 60s. There are the indigenous people of Australia, I think in the low 60s, and some of these numbers, again, I don't have them all tattooed on my wrist or anything, but so there is this range. It is unbelievably heartbreaking. I mean, just I'm straight up about all of this. Like, this is one of the most difficult facts I've ever had to absorb in my life. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of iterations as a thinker. I was a Christian and a socialist and all. I mean, I'm going to go through a whole journey. But I found almost nothing harder to absorb than this question of differences in IQ between groups. And this goes back many, many decades. This was talked about by Herrnstein in Murray, of course, in the bell curve in 94. And nobody's been able to overturn that. And their basic argument is to say, look, blacks make less money than Ashkenazi Jews. But if you normalize by IQ, they don't. And this is, again, it's heartbreaking stuff, and it is so difficult to absorb this into your daily thinking.
Immigration.
It really makes you think, though, how places like Canada can continue to say diversity is our strength when the studies, the reality is so different than that. And I really don't think 50 years from now, when they're speaking mostly Chinese in British Columbia, when you got growing Muslim populations in Quebec and Ontario, people are going to be asking, is multiculturalism that great? And if our government keeps saying diversity is our strength, that's not going to be a good enough answer for them. What do you think is going to come of that?
Well, I completely agree with you.
Now, I think that the end result of a lot of this, like it has become in Europe, is things like the European Union, where the biggest people rejecting the European Union are places like Poland, are places like the Eastern European countries that are like, nope, we have our national identity. We want to make our own decisions. We have our own ideas of what our future is. And that is why a lot of this is happening, the destruction of the cultures, all this mass immigration where people are literally being imported. And where is that money coming from? How are these people able to import migrants and just ship them all throughout Europe? The destruction in Canada, the destruction in America. If you get rid of people's identity, just make the government bigger and bigger and bigger. Why have borders? Why have countries? If Canada is just multiculturalism, as most Canadians describe it, why not just become a part of Egypt? If you don't have a language, culture, or borders, why even be Canada?
Culture.
It go a little something like this. I like my rap vids like I like my coffee, compartmentalized, white in the front, black in the back. Silence you, let the albino privilege speak. Segregation for the nation, white trash god prancing, 40 with the beard of a 14-year-old girl. Took me 3 weeks to throw tween shade on my chin, yo, I'm a shave by sneezing. Hit albums deep in the history, bro. Relevance kinda sorta a mystery, yo. Trash millionaire rage against Trump. Fake anger whiter than my skinny rump.
Both of them are from Canada. Lauren Southern used to be kind of a generic anti-feminist, anti-social justice warrior type commentator. She'd just say things like, I identify as an attack helicopter. Ooh, triggered you. Feminists are stupid. Fucking Anita Sarkeesian. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Stefan Molyneux, on the other hand, came out of libertarianism and was a kind of intellectual or pseudo-intellectual philosopher who would talk about things like the non-aggression principle and maximum freedom and no regulations and small government and all that kind of jazz. Now, as the whole debate between like social justice warriors, anti-social justice warriors, feminists and anti-feminists, the left and the right and the conservatives and the liberals and the hard right and the hard left went on, things increasingly became about culture, race, civilization, Western values. And Lauren Southern moved away from this sort of generic anti-feminism into white nationalism, ethno-nationalism, rhetoric about preserving the white culture.
Am I proud of being white? I'm happy happy to be white. I'm fine being white. I feel zero shame whatsoever for being white. If I say I'm proud, if I were black, I could say I'm proud. If I were Asian, I could say I'm proud. If I were any other ethnicity, I could say I'm proud because that's how our culture is. But if I'm white and I say I'm proud, the media will go nuts.
About shifting demographics, saying that if you look at these cultures and you look at these cultures and then you compare them to kind of the Western culture and dynamic, they are inferior and they are savage, and Enlightenment values is how we have come where we are, and that's all at threat because of minority groups and immigration, etc. And Stefan Molyneux has also moved into a person fixated on IQ science, and then if you call me racist, I can just say, yeah, but Asians are even smarter than white people. That argument is solely intended to shit on African people. Like, that's the entire point of that argument. The only reason IQ ever comes up is when they just want to say black people are stupider. Like, that's the entire point. And the only time that Jews and Asians comes up is when they get called racist. It's a defense. But whatever, that's just my opinion about his views. That's kind of his shtick. Now, the reason all of this internet war shit has suddenly become so relevant in this part of the world, specifically New Zealand and our neighbours Australia, is because they decided to do an Australasian tour of Australia and New Zealand. This created a big hubbub. People on the left were like, we don't want these racist propagandists coming over just to shit on minority cultures and shit on anybody who isn't white and just spread their shit all over our societies. Personally, I find it really ironic that two people from Canada who talk about sticking to your own culture, people shouldn't, go over borders and spread their culture into a different culture, decided to bring this sort of very niche white nationalist and, in my opinion, white supremacist culture to Australia and New Zealand, which overall, just in overarching sense, are generally accepting of multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity, having a multiracial society, and so on, and just sort of march in with their white nationalist, white supremacist views and say, hey, Australia and New Zealand, we don't really give a shit about anything that's particularly going on in your countries. We just came here to tell you that you should freak out about Muslims and you should freak out about minorities because that's our culture and we're bringing it to your culture, and this should be your culture now. Like, it's our business to get in your fucking faces about what we think. And I just find that so ironic. I'm gonna get into that later on in the video. But anyways, these kind of nativist folks who believe in sticking to your own culture decided to come over and stick their noses into our culture and tell us how to live. That pissed off a lot of people on the left. And then there's a lot of people on the right, or not even necessarily on the right, but just a swath of people who say it's all about free speech, it's all about freedom of expression, these people should be welcome to speak in any venue, in any kind of context, and then it's up to us to refute them with better ideas, and then that is the way that you will actually defeat them. Marketplace of ideas, yada yada. After some doubts about whether they would actually make it, visas and all this sort of thing, eventually they got round to being able to go to Australia. When Lauren arrived in Australia, she was wearing a shirt that said, it's okay to be white, which triggered the fuck out of me. I tell you what, I was so offended. I was very sad. A lot of people needed their safe space after that, and she got in a few debates and so forth in Australia, helped and hosted by an organisation called Axiomatic, who describe themselves as thus. Axiomatic is a company created to support the promotion of right-of-centre speaking events in Australia and New Zealand. So they found a right-wing promoter who was willing to put them into their venues. I don't care that much about them going to Australia. Australia actually has a bit of a reputation as being kind of racist. I don't want to be mean to my Australian brothers and sisters, and when I went to Australia, everyone there was just fantastic. Great people. I went up and down the East Coast. It was beautiful. A lot of variety. There's many positives to Australia. But Australia does have a very difficult and depressing history with the Aboriginal people.
Here is the answer. 3 generations. Half-blood grandmother, quadroon daughter, octoroon grandson. Now, as you can see in the 3rd generation, or 3rd cross, no trace of native origin is apparent. The continuing infiltration of white blood finally stamps out the black colour. The Aboriginal has simply been bred out. Now, we come to the Moore River Native Settlement. Ladies, most of you are familiar with our work here, the training of domestic servants and farm labourers. I would like to thank you for your continuing support. Hundreds of half-caste children have been gathered up and brought here to be given the benefit of everything our culture has to offer.
Because the Aboriginal population in Australia is so small, and they suffered such extreme oppression and lack of representation over the course of Europeans colonizing Australia, they're pretty much just completely fucked on every possible level. So many of them are struggling and homeless and alcoholic. Their families have been torn apart. They have no resources. They have no jobs. Their culture has been so utterly raped by the Europeans, to be frank, that they have a reputation as being, savage criminals and dirty and so forth, because they have no prospects, they have no hope, they have nothing to turn to. They just end up on the streets or, doing crime, trying to get by. And the more that the Aborigines are kind of immiserated by the colonial history which has befallen them, the more that the European mainstream just says, you see that? Look at how bad and disgusting and awful the Aboriginals are. And I think it has resulted in a kind of racist culture to do with the Aboriginals. That's my perception. I'm not Australian. That's how I just look at it from a distance. And obviously New Zealand has plenty of problems with racism. I think New Zealand is also a racist country, just in a different way for different reasons. We are less tolerant of expressing racism in the mainstream than Australia is. So that's just some context as to why I thought, the way they was treated in Australia wasn't that surprising to me. It's kind of like what I expected. We have less of an attitude of around, we'll just see what they have to say, we'll debate them, we'll defeat them in the marketplace of ideas. I think we have more of an attitude of, we don't care for your opinions and your views, we don't know why you're here and we don't want you here. And it was a bit more hostile, and it was a bit more, I guess, indifferent. Now, the main thing I wanted to talk about that happened in Australia was just that at one of their events, Stefan Molyneux basically just spent 20 minutes or so shitting on Aboriginal people.
Do you know how they explained the sun? This is the explanation for the sun. A crane and an emu, sounds like a voice joke, walk into a bar. A crane and an emu are fighting over an egg. And the emu egg gets hurled into the sky and it bursts into flames. Talk about your sunny side up. And I'm sorry, my producer said if I did that joke, he was going to join the protesters. I'm not saying I don't understand, but it was my little treasure. I like that joke. So, if you imitate that, then the kookaburra bird will get offended, it won't cry, and then the gods won't light the fire, and there'll be no sunlight, and it will be nothing, like darkness till the end of time. So already you have a restriction on free speech. You can't, or whatever, like you can't make that sound, because it's terrible. The world will descend into eternal darkness, and so they were very, very certain, and they were completely and totally wrong. And they said, I don't really get the whole kookaburra sun, like that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. In other words, they questioned. Now, what happens when you live in a society which is both absolutely certain and absolutely wrong, and you begin to ask questions? You're a heretic. You are a blasphemer. You are offending someone, somewhere, somehow, and the penalty is pretty much always the same. It's physical or genetic death. You're killed, you're banished, or nobody will have sex with you. Then when that culture is based on anti-rationality, it's very dangerous. And this, to Lauren's point about multiculturalism, thank you. Multiculturalism is very dangerous because you have a whole bunch of people all gathered together. They all believe different absolutes that are absolutely wrong. And they don't have a common methodology for resolving those disputes, other than the aforementioned big heavy rock.
And And I don't know the purpose of that. I don't know what that produces. The Aboriginal population of Australia is 3.3%. It's very small. They have pretty much no political representation. They have no power. They have no sway on anything. And Stefan decides to come from halfway around the world to Australia to just rag on the native people for no clear reason except to say that white people and Western culture are superior to this total minority which has been colonized. So I don't know what the fear is. Aboriginals have these backwards customs. They didn't know what the sun was. They didn't know what disease was. They didn't know all the stuff. I don't know what that achieves except to just say, look at how stupid the Aboriginals are. Ha ha ha. They're 3.3% of the population. There is no risk of the Aboriginal people overtaking Australia, putting witch doctors in hospitals.
If we are to have multiple cultures involved in every facet of our life, does that mean we now need to have witch doctors at our medical conferences, working in our hospitals, because we can't just make Western medicine the supreme leading medicine in our society, which is supposed to be multicultural? Is this not just creating segregated societies? There are all these questions that come out of the multicultural project, and if you start asking them, it causes doubt in people's minds of what the future will look like, and that doubt will turn itself into political action of people wanting to preserve the best parts of their society, which I'd like to think most people would concur is Western parts.
It's absurd. The Aboriginals that do believe in witch doctors and have witch doctors are simply not going to get them put into hospitals except maybe in the most rural, out-of-touch place that could possibly exist. And the fact is, Aborigines, they need help just like every other human. They may have had these irrational, illogical beliefs. A lot of Europeans still have those, and they definitely have in the past, and a lot of Christians have those. And you know what? Just humans have those. Basically any culture you can think of has some irrational beliefs of some kind. But they're still just fucking human beings living in a Western society. They are just inside a Western culture or society. They have no choice about that. That's where they are. So as that's where they are, humanism dictates they need healthcare, they need housing, they need education, they need nutrition. Like, what is the alternative that is being proposed here? There is none. It was literally just Stefan, racist Molyneux, I apologize to people who have offended, saying, let's just laugh at the Aborigines. That was it. And I just found that so sad that was the kind of thing that so many people wanted to get together to look at and cheer on. It doesn't make any fucking sense to me. The one thing that stood out for me with Lauren Southern was her going to the most Muslim place in Australia, Lakemba, in Sydney. The very fact that she would just go to Lakemba is hilarious. She just looked up, what's the most Muslim place in Australia? I'm just gonna go there and be a fucking nuisance to everybody. Because that's kind of her MO. Go to a minority area, fearmonger and irritate everybody, in order to make her audience scared about the Muslims taking over. People who say Lauren Southern is not racist, I think, are completely refuted by the fact she's making these videos where she is walking around just looking at people's skin color. I mean, only a fucking racist would do that. That makes her a racist. That is a racist behavior. She is fucking racist. It's just a fucking fact. I'm sorry if it hurts your feelings.
Facts don't care about your feelings.
And in Lakemba, the mask completely slipped in this clip, which is basically a TKO to the concept that she's not racist.
It's a very monoculture in this area.
I don't think so. If you just look across the road there, you've got Pakistani and Indian restaurants.
Right, but do you see many British pubs in this area?
There's one right there.
Where?
The Lakemba Hotel, it's right there.
There's many funny things to that clip, but this bit right here.
It's a very monoculture in this area.
I don't think so. If you just look across the road there, you've got Pakistani and Indian restaurants.
Right, but do you see many British pubs?
Think about that. She says there's a monoculture in this area, and the person she's talking to says, just look across the road, there's Indian and Pakistani restaurants. And Lauren just immediately switches gears to, there's no British pubs, which is to say, where's the white people? It's not about monoculture. It's not even about multiculture. It's just about where's the white people. Even the multiculturalism thing with her is just a canard. The thing she's primarily concerned about is where the white people are. Because if there are Pakistani and Indian restaurants, Muslim, most likely, and Hindu, then there's more than one culture. It's not a monoculture. But Lauren is not concerned with the idea that it's a monoculture. She's concerned with the idea that it's not white enough. And I just think the mask completely slipped in that clip. But where's the white people? That's the problem. It's obviously about skin color. She's a racist. And just the hilarious bit at the end. Where's the British pubs? There's one right there. And everyone's like, monoculture is fine. It just has to be a white monoculture. There's also the clip that she produced about Lakemba on her channel, which was really stupid. It's basically just her being like, I want to go to a mosque and I want to debate Islam.
Rick Ages from Campsie Police.
Yep.
I've been informed that you're intending to attending the Lakemba Mosque. Is that correct?
I actually have no intentions of attending. I was just planning on walking through the streets and seeing how the culture was here.
Yes?
Yep.
Are you satisfied with that?
Yep.
So where do you intend on walking to now?
I was just going to walk out and check how the mosque was.
Check where the mosque was?
Yep. Would I not be allowed to attend if I wanted to?
I've got grave concerns that you may cause an imminent breach of the peace down there, so I'm asking you not to attend.
Why would I cause a breach of the peace?
Because it's highly religious down there.
So would it be me causing a breach of the peace, or would it be the people there?
Well, your presence may cause them to be, be offensive and be objective to your attending there.
And so that would be them being offended by me.
Can you not interview me? The local community walk around here without any fear. I walk around here without any fear.
Right, but I'm a critic of Islam.
Yes.
So I can't be in this multiculture because my culture is allowed to have free speech and criticize.
Have your own beliefs and you're allowed to have your own beliefs. I have no issue with that. I'm asking you not to attend down there because I have a fear that you may cause an imminent breach of the peace. In doing so, you may commit an offence.
Am I allowed to walk through the area?
I'm asking you not to go down to Haldon Street. You're
asking me, but do I have the legal right to walk down this area?
At this point in time, no.
And a local cop just trying to do his job, saying like, oh, you're inciting a problem, it's a breach of the peace, don't want you around, get out of here, go away. Because he's a cop, so his job is to try to preserve the peace, protect and serve. That's his role, he's a local police officer. I'm gonna keep pushing, I really gotta get into this mosque, and I really gotta get in these people's faces, for some reason. And eventually the cop says it is illegal for her to go in there, but I kind of disagreed. It's a little bit nitpicky, but, she hadn't actually done anything yet, so I can't see how she could be in trouble for a breach of the peace if she hadn't yet breached the peace. Is potentially breaching the peace in the future a crime or, illegal? I don't know. That's pretty fucking murky. But my perception of this clip is the cop is just like, she's so fucking annoying, I just wanted to get out of here. So he kind of just made up that it was illegal or what have you. And Lauren took from that...
As far as I'm concerned, they have Sharia law here. I was told if I talk to people, even if I put all my cameras away, I can't criticize Islam to people here on a public street in Australia, in Sydney. Don't tell me you don't have no-go zones. Don't tell me this is a multicultural country. Lakemba is a monoculture.
I don't think so. If you just look across the road there, you've got Pakistani Indian restaurants.
Right. But
this is Sharia law. There's a community of Muslims. The cop doesn't want you to harass them, so he's trying to find excuses to tell you to go away because you're annoying. That's about it. That's what was happening there. Now, New Zealand. I suppose this is where I think the really interesting part of this story happened. Maybe I think that just because it is my country, but I also think that the stuff that happened in New Zealand was a lot more interesting than what happened in Australia. And it's certainly going to be a lot more controversial amongst Stefan and Lauren's fans, a lot of whom probably hate New Zealand now and think it's like a regressive country or what have you. To which I say, personally, who gives a fuck that you think that? Before they showed up here, there was a big controversy about Auckland Mayor Phil Goff, who's a member of Labour and is moderately left-wing. I never saw him as really radical, saying that he had decided to ban them from speaking in public venues in Auckland. This actually created quite an outcry in this country, particularly amongst kind of like free speech advocates and lawyers saying Phil Goff cannot do that. He doesn't have the right to do that. It doesn't hold up with New Zealand laws and precedents. And a challenge was mounted by a group called the Free Speech Coalition. Now, just before Lauren and Stefan came to this country, the Free Speech Coalition caved and dropped the case, which was very curious and odd. I was trying to find out why that was the case. I thought maybe they lacked the resources to take on Phil Goff. Their case just wasn't coming together, but according to this article, the reasoning was actually a little bit different. Their justification for dropping the case makes utterly no sense to me, to be perfectly honest. So they said basically because the organisation of Regional Facilities Auckland disagreed with Phil Goff, and that the Auckland Council lawyers apparently agreed with them that Phil Goff had no justification for this, that they had won. So they just dropped their challenge. I find this very confusing because that meant that Lauren and Stefan still could not speak at Auckland venues because there was no challenge to the action Phil Goff had taken. But the Free Speech Coalition called this a victory. Like, unless I'm missing something, like someone's gonna have to explain that to me. But that's what this article says. So the Free Speech Coalition backed off and that was it. They couldn't speak at public venues in Auckland. Auckland is our biggest city. I think because Stefan and Lauren are kind of attention whores, that's where they would want to speak. So they were a bit fucked. I, as somebody who understands what free speech is, and that the dimensions of it change between public and private venues, do believe that potentially Phil Goff didn't really have a leg to stand on. Potentially. That would have to be played out in court. And it could have been found that Phil Goff doesn't have the power under the New Zealand Constitution to actually make a unilateral decision like that. And it seems that some of the lawyers that worked for Auckland Council actually disagree with him on that. And as somebody who thinks that free speech is something that needs to be protected, if that had played out through the courts or what have you, if they had mounted a challenge on that and Phil Goff had lost and they had then been allowed to speak at public venues, I guess it would have caused a delay, which was bad for them because they make less moolah, what have you, and the inconvenience is just such a tragedy. Maybe they could have received compensation for that. I don't know. I would just say that's how the chips fall. That was a legitimate free speech issue Phil Goff lost. But as I said, that group pulled out. So Phil Goff he won. Now, straight away when they arrived in this country, I knew things were not going to go particularly well for them. When walking through the airport, they did this pose under a Maori carving. Now, they explained this as we were just doing a joke. We weren't trying to disrespect the culture of Maori people at all. It was about a tweet that somebody had made that said, the Maori archers will hold you back. So they did a funny pose mocking that, and it was just a joke. The thing is, I totally believe that explanation. I think that they think that that was a joke and it was funny and people would laugh and stuff, but this moment really showed me that they do not understand this country. They don't know anything about this country. They don't know anything about its customs. They don't know anything about its history. That they're entirely fucking ignorant walking off the plane into what the at least biculture of this country is. Because if they knew anything at all about Māori people, they would know that Māori people do a lot of dancing, especially the haka, which is the famous Māori war dance, which you can see if you watch rugby. And that them doing like silly poses like that, bending their legs and taking a bit of a war stance, would be seen as insulting because people would perceive that as being like a haka or like a war dance. And that they had come through the airport and were being like, oh, look at these silly Māori people. And again, I'm taking their explanation at face value. If that is their explanation, that it was just a joke and they were pretending it was a force field, yeah, they are complete fucking ignoramuses about Maori culture. They don't know anything. And that is just so interesting to me, that they would have the gall to come to this fucking country and lecture about our culture and how we should be while knowing absolutely nothing about anything in this country. It's just fucking unbelievable. And these are people who are seen as rational, logical geniuses. They didn't have the slightest fucking clue that Maori people do war dances and make stances that look like that. Unreal. The ignorance. Another reason they weren't worried about the ban in Auckland public venues was that a private venue called the Power Station had taken them up and said they could speak there. So they were like, it's still going ahead, so we're not too worried about things. But then that fell apart when the Power Station cancelled on them and Lauren and Stefan blamed left-wing intimidation and tactics and so forth.
Basically what occurred is we were expecting to speak tonight at a wonderful venue. We had a call with them last night, and on the phone, the venue owner knew who Stefan and I were. They knew it was a controversial event, and they said, this is a venue that supports free speech. This is a venue that wants all opinions to be allowed here, and I understand you're controversial, but you will be allowed. Now, we usually wait a little bit before we announce what the actual venue is until right before the event so that protesters can't really gather and it's just more secure overall. But as soon as it was 1 p.m., right, that we released the event?
Yeah.
1 p.m. today, we released the event name, and by 2 p.m., we got a call from the venue host, and just the guy was in absolute hysteria, saying, you cannot be on this property. Get off, get out of here. No more show.
Well, and if you're here in 10 minutes, I'm going to have you arrested
for
trespassing. So that's a tough place to negotiate from. And of course, we tried, but he was dead set on it. And the change in demeanor night before to the day is really quite extraordinary. And at some point, I'm sure we'll find out exactly what happened. It's funny, you know, I'm not used to not getting what I plan for, you know, like, I mean, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's been self-directed like you for many years, I'm used to, okay, here's what I want to execute. I mean, you weren't like, gee, I hope I finish Farmlands, you know, like, because you can make things happen when you work for yourself, when you work in a studio, you can make things happen, you know. There's very few people I haven't
like I've wanted to talk to that I can't talk to. There's very few shows, I can't think of any, where I've wanted to do it, and I'm just not used to having something between my will and my objective that I can't control, and that is a very strange feeling.
Which makes perfect sense because that's their MO.
I truly believe that there were strong forces involved, whether it be government calling this guy, threats, the threat of his windows being smashed, maybe the police telling him, your whole place is going to be destroyed if you hold this, because there were hundreds of people that had no respect for our free speech, no respect for the questions that we were coming here to propose and engage in.
Death threats, doxing, violence, smashing the face of people who they call Nazis, hitting them with sticks and murder, and they say they're going to rape our faces. That's always the explanation. So it's definitely not a surprise that that's why they think the power station cancelled. But that's a fake narrative shown by this clip. Qualan Robertson, who's kind of like this guy in the background who's always shadowing Lauren Southern, and I've seen him in the background of Tommy Robinson videos, and he's always holding the camera and he's just sort of lurking, was interviewed by Newshub's Paddy Gower as to why the cancellation occurred.
We've literally just come here, we've got all the chairs ordered, we've got all of the AV, everything set up, we've got a sold-out event, and the owner's just called us and said he's had phone calls and pressure from places with huge resources which have forced him to cancel. He knew the nature of the event, he knew what the event was about, he was completely happy with it, but he said it's been so immense and so intense that he's just had to pull out, so we're not going to have a show in New Zealand.
What does this mean now? There is no show, there is nothing for Lauren Southern, there is nothing for Stefan Molyneux, it's over.
It's over. We can't fix the event in the next 24 hours. There's no other venues that are going to do it because of the massive pressure from the far left in this country, who seem to dominate all of the politics and dominate
the police are here to protect this. Surely you can get this on. Did you not tell the organiser you've got a police presence here?
Well, the organiser was working with the police. All of us were working carefully with the police. The organiser was perfectly happy to go ahead, but he said it was unprecedented, the amount of pressure that he's just been put under. So he's just said we have 5 minutes to get on the premises.
But somebody contrasted that with what one of the actual co-owners of the venue said.
We didn't exactly know who was coming. As soon as we found out, we're not comfortable at all to have that in the venue, because it goes against quite a lot of things that we say. Certainly freedom of speech is fine, but there's also humanitarian issues, things like that. You can have freedom of speech, but you really need to edit a lot of things that you say, particularly if a wide variety of people that we associate, that are friends with and deal with, do not agree with what they have to say. They can say whatever they want, but personally, I don't want it in my venue.
While she did say that she received some pressure and that friends and so forth and other people were saying we don't want that around, she also clearly said, I don't support that, I don't stand for it. I didn't really know much about these two, but once I found out more, I was like, I don't want that in my venue. The fact is, you just weren't fucking welcome. The venue owners didn't agree with you, and they also found out about how much everybody around them also dislikes your views, and obviously they didn't know enough about you, and once they found out more about you, they were like, no, we don't want that. So please don't pretend that it was just social pressure and it was because of threats. If those were some sort of a factor, it's not like I was there, I don't know for sure. It wasn't just that, as explicitly stated by one of the co-owners. They also thought that you are trash and they didn't want you around. Sorry. I also just want to throw in this moment, while she was leaving her hotel with Stefan and Colin, a Maori guy's like, get out of this country, just bugger off, fuck off, get out of here, go home.
Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux running into interference in reception on the way out after an interview.
I believe you yelled at us, get on the next plane to Canada, don't hit your ass on the way out.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Auckland man Shane Tapo, another visitor, not holding back.
What are you doing here?
Well, I'm just wondering.
What are you doing? What are you doing here?
Organization
No, I'm not
here.
running a news organisation. No. We're being interviewed. Yeah,
Yes.
Good.
Oh my god, this is so intolerant. Oh, I'm gonna challenge this guy. We're gonna have a confrontation. The guy's just like, don't know what you're doing here. Oh, the tolerant left, eh? Fuck if it isn't delicious. A native person who was from this country, who has been here before anybody else, is telling her to fuck off. You know, an ethno-nationalist. Delicious. Now, while they were waffling around this country, there were various protests going back and forth. Hundreds of people, because we're New Zealand and we can't quite pull off thousands, were protesting against these two. And then there were counter-protests of just 30 or so people here and there. Lauren Southern claimed that there are polls that show that 70% of this country support her and Stefan's right to speak, and I don't know what these polls are. I've tried to look them up. Do they exist? I don't know. But that's what she said. Assuming that's true, we can at least say that those people didn't go outside. They sort of just stayed at home and supported them from afar. So after their waffling, they ended up talking to Paddy Gower of Newshub. Now, Paddy Gower, I think, is an interesting person for kind of the wrong reasons. I first became aware of him when he moderated the debate between National Leader Bill English and now Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of Labour.
Campaign between James and Phoebe really heating up now. Thanks.
Fucking library.
This is the fucking news.
And just thought, he's weird. Like, I don't know how to describe it. He's just an odd man. He's very plain and kind of simple, and his entire thing is just, I want you to answer the question, and I refuse to take any tangents or any waffling. So throughout the prime ministerial debates, there were many moments where Jacinda Ardern would be giving an answer, and then Paddy Gower would come in and say, you know, that's a lot of words there, and you've said a whole lot of things, but that has not answered my question, and I just want to answer to my question. And Bill English would say something, and Paddy Gower would be like, but what about my question? You've not answered my question. So Paddy Gower ended up being the main interview of this country with Lawrence Southern and Stefan Molyneux, and I have to say, what an incredible mix. I could never have expected this in a million years. Paddy Gower, super normie, mainstream, straight down the line, mixed with Lawrence Southern and Stefan Molyneux, complete intellectual deflectors, tangent goers, hyper-analytical, semantical game players. It's just the worst mix you could possibly have, and I found it fucking fascinating and also hilarious. There's a few moments in this interview that I would just love to highlight here.
We had paid, we had an agreement in hand, and the guy who was in charge of the venue was very keen on, you know, free speech. It's an open canvas. You know, he knew who we were. He knew what was going on. Now, between the time that we sent out the emails and then when we were down at the venue, something changed. Something significant. This is a tough guy. He's hosted some very volatile acts. There's been riots in his venue. He's like a tough guy. So from going from being very enthusiastic about what we were doing to being terrified and hysterical and downright abusive, something happened in that hour, and we're going to find out what at some point, but we don't know right now.
Did the owner know that it was you guys coming?
Yeah,
absolutely.
How long out did he know? Because they
told him
said that they
yesterday.
didn't know.
In fact, he was probably one of the most enthusiastic venue people that we've had. He was saying this is an open place for free speech, just congratulating us, like just absolutely enthusiastic to have free speech at his venue. And the way that he was on the phone to the people helping out with the event after the venue was released, that something 100% happened. I'm very confident. He was terrified.
Yeah,
terrified.
But is it perhaps as simple as this, that as soon as it went public, so many people who are critical of what they say is hate speech, that's what they say that you're responsible for, just contacted him, and he agreed with them and pulled the pin on you.
To call it just critical is a little ridiculous, considering there were events planned saying they were planning on attacking fascists. So it wasn't just critical, it's people that they don't want open inquiry, they don't want free speech, they don't want questions asked, they want to, quite frankly, shut down events that disagree with the popular opinion, or not even the popular opinion, just their opinion. And it's very scary, especially when they call people like Stefan and I Nazis. To call someone a Nazi when they have no demonstrable evidence for it is to say we are genocidal individuals, and of course that's going to cause a ruckus, of course that's going to cause riots.
Yeah, but aren't you overstating this? Aren't you sort of picking out one or a small element of people that are referred to you as Nazis, when what you've got is actually a large stream of opinion that thinks you're responsible for hate speech?
So some of Paddy's responses here I think are totally spot on. But I would say that it's a bit more blasé than that. I don't think that there is a wide, broad consensus that they're responsible for hate speech. I think it's more of a kind of broad consensus that they're just not really welcome. People don't really want to hear from them.
What are you doing? What are you doing now?
They don't know why they're here to lecture to us, and they would prefer that they would just fuck off, so they'd get very little support, at least in the mainstream. I'm not talking about the kind of underground YouTube commenters kind of people. The people who are leaving angry comments under this video saying fucking regressive scum, killing freedom of speech, Lauren and Stefan are fucking geniuses, Paddy Gower's total retard, etc. It was not their voice that kind of defined the visit of these two. Those people are out there and they exist, and you're going to see them, especially in the YouTube comments. But I would say the sort of broad consensus that they were met with was just fuck off. You're just a pair of ignorant, irrelevant shitheads. That's kind of how it was. Outside of kind of generic right-wingery that we also have to kind of put up with in this country. It's just a total underground minority that actually even cares at all or knows who they are in any way. So, Now, quite early in the interview comes a moment that to me is just an iconic interview moment in my mind, which illustrates the incredible difference in opinion between hard right, hardliners on immigration, and generic mainstream sort of left-leaning society.
Well, what people say is hate speech is when you say that diversity is a weakness.
Right, and the suffragettes would have been considered against the modern status quo at the time. Individuals who criticized Christianity hundreds of years ago would have been prosecuted under blasphemy laws. I now criticize the religion of diversity, and I'm considered committing hate speech because that is the popular culture at the time.
Well, what I say to you, Lauren Southern, is that New Zealand is a diverse country. You say diversity is a weakness. This country is known as a melting pot. Are you saying we're a weak country?
Will you accept the diverse view that women should be stoned for the crime of being raped?
Answer the question.
It's kind of like seen as hate speech to some people when you're against diversity because New Zealand is seen as kind of a melting pot. He's approaching this from a New Zealand-centric perspective. He's a person who is of New Zealand. He's talked to a lot of New Zealanders. He has a lot of experience with what New Zealanders generally think in the mainstream. And if we check out New Zealand's demographics as shown in the 2013 census, 74% of people were European, 14.9% Māori, 11.8% Asian, 7.4% Pacific peoples, 1.2% Middle Eastern, Latin American and African. So although there is a sizable European majority, a full 26% of this country is not white or not European. And that is kind of what is familiar to New Zealanders. Walking down the street and seeing an Indian shop, buying some chocolate and popcorn and saying, "Hey, Sanjeev, what's up?" And there's like a little statue of Ganesh or whatever. This is mildly racist itself. Then walking back home and walking past some Maori people and some Pacific Island people and some Asian people and just thinking nothing of it because that is this country. And that just being a broad New Zealand experience, which is experienced as diversity. And that's just the thing that Paddy Gower is expressing there. And then the ridiculous moment when Lauren Southern responds to that like this.
This country is known as a melting pot. Are you saying we're a weak country?
Will you accept the diverse view that women should be stoned for the crime of being raped?
Answer the question.
Oh my god, like that moment is just so illuminating to me, particularly when you look at how that was perceived by like anti-social justice people and supporters of Lauren and Stefan. Now, Kellen Robinson, he talked about it and he said this: a New Zealand TV host is left completely speechless at Lauren Southern breaking down his arguments. I don't think I've ever seen such a wrecked moment as this. Ever. Irish anti-social justice dude Computing Forever responded to it this way.
Will you accept the diverse view that women should be stoned for the crime of being raped? Because that's what multiculturalism is. You accept all cultures.
The question here is...
You accept people of all diverse opinions. Is that a view that you believe should be included in this diversity?
You're not answering the question.
Yes, I am. I'm answering it by asking you, is diversity really a strength if you have to bring in views that are anti-women, views that are anti-democracy, views that are anti-free speech, views that go against everything that has created the most beautiful culture in the world, the West?
The question was, New Zealand is a diverse country. We're known as a melting pot.
We're known as a melting pot. Okay, well, she answered the question perfectly, and she tried to make him think about what he was proposing by framing her answer to him in the form of a question. He just cannot understand what she's saying. You can't support diversity if it means that you have completely incompatible cultures forced to live together.
He is so out of his depth with the intellectualism of saying diversity equals raping and stoning women. He's in a suplex of logic. And that is illuminating because it shows me the completely different perspectives that general mainstream and sort of more right, hard right commentators and fans are coming from. It's a bit of a Rorschach test for where you kind of stand politically on these issues, because I saw that long silence as Paddy Gower just being like, what the fuck? I was talking about going down to the local shop, getting on the bus, and there's some Pacific Island people. I'm gonna go to the kebab shop, and there's Turkish people there. That's what he was thinking. And so that long silence, the way I saw it was him being like, what the hell? What the fuck are you talking about? Because in the little bubble and little narrow way of thinking that Lauren and Stefan have built for themselves, the fans are also ensconced in, that is what diversity is. Diversity is rape, it is stoning the gays, cutting off the heads, beheading, genital mutilation. It is raping dogs to death. Yes, that was something that a white identitarian group actually talked about. Migrants raping dogs. You know, that is what they think of when they think of diversity. A normie, mainstream, left-ish leaning individual such as Paddy Gower has no idea what the fuck you are talking about. And that's not a moment of ownage, that's a moment of what the fuckness. It's just so interesting how people see things exactly how they need to see it. I don't know if it's a way of coping or a way of convincing yourself that your idols, Stefan and Lauren, that they're making some sort of an impact. They can just do no wrong, no matter how fucked up and bizarre their replies are and how much people don't understand what they're talking about. They have absolutely immolated, crushed, and devastated whoever. It's just a fascinating psychological phenomenon that I also don't relate to or understand, because there's no particular individual who I would always defend as being some sort of rational genius. If they weren't being a rational genius, I would point that out. But they made these two into idols who can basically do no wrong, and you will see that reflected in some of the angry YouTube comments that I'm going to receive for this video. A couple of other highlights were just Paddy Gower saying, please answer the question multiple times, and Stefan saying, first you were telling her to answer the question, now you're getting angry at me for answering a question, and their fans being like, wrecked, crushed, destroyed, Paddy Gower is dead. The usual bits and pieces about IQ. The, I think, believable explanations as to why they did that pose under the Murray Arch, and this just purely sublime moment. Oh god, so good.
Have a sense of humor about yourself. Are you saying that, let's say that we did want to do that, which we didn't, are you saying the Maoris can't have any sense of humor about themselves? That seems kind of racist.
Are you serious?
I am serious.
This is the whole switcheroo. We're gonna accuse the left of being racist. Yeah, because they always call us Nazi and they always call us racist. So we're gonna accuse them of being racist and that will own them. Maori people not finding your joke funny and me pointing that out is racist? So it's racist to say that Maori people don't find you funny. Maori people have to find Stefan Molyneux funny. Otherwise you're being racist against Maori people.
Are you saying the Maoris can't have any sense of humor about themselves? That seems kind of racist.
Are you serious?
Logic stranglehold. Lauren did a few of her standard dog whistles about Western culture, which, I mean, come on. I don't know how people are just so gullible about this act that Western culture has nothing to do with whiteness. She walks around places like Lakemba just literally judging people for the skin color and saying that this represents the death of Western values. But I'll never convince anyone who believes otherwise, so I'm just going to stop with that. There was also an interesting moment where they talked about how their contract with the power station was not adhered to, and that's an injustice. This is an argument Lauren also made on Twitter. She quote tweeted this person, Evan Hadfield, who said, I love how the world thinks we're assholes gets translated to they hate free speech. This was an economic decision. You weren't as valuable to them as doing the right thing, so you got cut. I thought you liked free market economics. She responded with, we had a sold out show and an agreement with a venue that was broken. Other venues couldn't be used because of government intervention or threats of violence. That's not the free market. Also very ironic to see I don't care about the gay cake points, skip that. And that's interesting because Paddy Gower said in the interview,
it's simple, isn't it? You can't find a place. People are free to stop you from going into their venues. People are free to oppose you.
No, see, now, if you say, because we had paid and we had an agreement with the guy.
Yeah.
Now, you wouldn't like it if the bank phoned you up and said, hang on, let me finish.
Yeah.
You wouldn't like it if the bank phoned you up and said, hey, Patrick, we found a better price for your home, so we're kicking you out tomorrow. And you'd say, well, no, we have a deal. We've signed, we have a deal, right?
And you're welcome to go away and enforce that contract. You are absolutely welcome to go away under New Zealand law and enforce that contract if there is one. But still, that's a choice that's been made.
I don't understand what you mean.
Yes, you can try to resolve that issue with the contract that was broken. Doesn't change the fact that they didn't fucking want you there, and the reason that they broke their contract is because they fucking don't like you. And somebody breaking a contract, and there being consequences for breaking a contract, if any are bought, I don't know if they did anything about it, I don't know the terms of that contract, are part of a free market transaction. If somebody breaks a contract with you, you can pursue that. So Paddy Gower was like, yeah, you have every right to pursue that. The breaking of a contract is part of the free market. It's just something that should have a consequence, or could have a consequence in your favor, potentially. Obviously, it's in your disfavor that you didn't get to speak, but that's not outside the bounds of a free market situation, I don't think. The final cherry on top was just the end of the interview.
Yeah, that's powerful forces, I'd say.
Yeah, but isn't it more likely that it's more basic than that? That it's just that the venue owner just kind of didn't want you there.
You would like it to be that.
You're asking us to theorize on an unknown, but I think when somebody goes 180 in the space of 1 hour, usually that's because some other factor has come in to influence their decision.
But it might be something a lot simpler than.
He might have been beamed up by space aliens and replaced with a replicant. I don't know. We'll theorize as we stand, but we don't know.
Well, I think this is a good place to leave it.
I appreciate the venue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. God bless.
Thank you.
It was so abrupt. It's just like, what are we doing here? What's the point of this? And I think that reflects the attitude of New Zealand, generally speaking. I'm not speaking for all New Zealanders. The mainstream overarching sense of it was just like, okay, that's enough. Now, it didn't quite end there with Paddy Gower, because he did a kind of post-mortem about the situation on this panel show called The Project. I don't know what The Project means or what that is. I never understood why this show existed, but whatever, he went on that show. He said some things that made perfect sense to me, like he just didn't understand what the hell they're talking about, that they're hyper nitpickers, that they create these kind of semantical traps for people. It's just irritating and weird and kind of a waste of time. I mean, that makes perfect sense. But then he also said, like, they totally nailed me. They just totally fucking nailed me and stuff. I don't know why. He's a weird man.
Please welcome Newshub national correspondent Paddy Gower.
So, Paddy, you just talked to these two. What are they like?
Well, it was sort of like being thrown down in front of a machine gun of sort of nitpickery, where you could sort of say to them, hey, look, the sky is blue, and they would sort of come back to you and say, no, it's not. You know, And
not firm friends with the facts is my impression.
Yeah, but they're very good rehearsed. They're very well rehearsed at not being firm friends with the firm facts or whatever it is. You know, they're very good at that. They're professionals, and actually in some respects, in terms of having an intellectual argument with them, they totally nailed me. I just could not compete with them.
Kulin responded on Twitter and he said, here's the interviewer, Patrick Gowers NZ, explaining how he was scared of Lauren and how she nailed him. He was definitely not expecting this and is basically now a broken man. That seems a bit far. I think he's more of just a kind of bit of a confused man in general, who does kind of represent just the general attitude towards these two people.
She was all go, and it was actually quite frightening being against them, but at the same time I kind of looked at them and, you know, it was just like, it was a surreal experience for me, because I was just like, man, I just want this thing to be over, because I just don't even know what you're saying, you know. It's just like, what are you on about here? Yeah. And the best bit was actually when I stopped him and he said, why are you stopping me? I said, because you're on a rant. And he didn't know what a rant was. And I said, it's just when someone it's a Kiwi word for when someone just keeps raving on, man. It's got nothing to do with what you're saying. I just want to break it up because there's an audience watching here and it's boring.
Well, that's...
There's actually commenters saying, like, New Zealand has completely fallen to Sharia. The Muslim population of New Zealand is 1.18%. Minuscule. It's tiny. It's not even the fastest growing religion. So perhaps in places like Sweden, where the demographics are changing quite rapidly and that is very difficult for some people to cope with, countries like Australia, where they constantly have these boats full of people arriving on their shores that they're not quite sure what to do with and some people see as an invasion of some kind, this rhetoric makes sense. But in New Zealand, which has a tiny Muslim population and which is geographically isolated, it doesn't make sense to most people in the context of this country. So the problem with these rational geniuses, Lauren and Stefan, in this sense, is that they just assume that their rhetoric is going to be universally applicable in every situation that they're in. I think it shows that they're not actually that smart. They don't understand that there are different places in the world that actually have different cultures, ironically enough, that also include a lot of people that look like them and look like me. The Paddy Gower thing was still not complete because for no reason whatsoever, 3 days after all of the controversy had occurred between him and Stefan and Lauren, Paddy Gower came out and wrote an article on Newshub saying that he was not destroyed by them. And this article didn't need to be written, it had no reason to exist. He just fell into their trap of responding to their bullshit about how he got owned, and ironically enough, now that has caused him to be owned. Because if he just walked away from that interview just being like, you know, I'm getting on with my life now, their fans would just still be complaining on the internet ragefully. But he's gone ahead and said, you didn't destroy me, 3 days later. So it's obvious it's still on your mind, and he says nothing in the article that he didn't already say on the project show. So it's totally redundant. Finally, the cherry on top of their aborted New Zealand visit was the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who's just come back from giving birth to her beloved baby, Aroha, which means love in Te Reo, or Māori, was asked about them and said this.
Saying that New Zealand as a country is hostile to free speech. What do you make of that?
I think we're hostile to their views. And look, they're here because there were no grounds to block them being here. That does not mean we welcome their views. Look, as I say, there was no grounds on which to block them from coming here. I think you'll see from the reaction they've had from New Zealanders that their views are not those that are shared by this country, and I'm quite proud of that.
And Lauren just flicked through what she's got in her Rolodex of generic insults and said it's virtue signaling. A blatant display of the limits of tolerance and diversity. You say you support multiculturalism, different views, diversity, but you can't even support differing opinions being espoused peacefully for one night? It's all virtue signaling nonsense. Classic. There was some interesting symbolism in her giving of the statement itself, because in the background you can hear a Waiata or Māori song. So she is giving this statement while Māori people are singing. Just seems a little bit symbolic of the fact that it's a multicultural country, that that's just a normal thing that's going on here. And it's also funny that she's holding her baby that she just had, because she's the first leader of a country to give birth, and everyone's enamored of this baby, and it's become sort of like a royal family, a royal baby kind of thing, which personally I find pukifying, but it's almost like, the royal couple comes out and they're like, this does not stand for our country. It's just not cricket. And Lauren's kind of committing another faux pas, virtue signaling, and coming off like a total jerk again. So when you came into the country, you made a jerk of yourself instantly in the airport, and then as you go out of the country, you make a jerk of yourself again. And you just don't understand this country. Now, there's many New Zealand Stefan and Lauren fans who are going to feel very deprived and very sad. And I would say, outside of the Phil Goff public venue situation, get fucked. Lauren is a racist, white supremacist, as far as I'm concerned. Stefan proved definitively that he is a total racist when he did his big spiel about Aboriginal people for no fucking reason in a country which has a tiny Aboriginal minority that has no power and has no chance of taking over that country and putting witch doctors in hospitals. He's just a fucking racist. That's it. Fuck you. You lost. The country overall didn't fucking like them and were hostile to their ideas. So go fuck yourself. Okay, sorry. I got a little bit mean at the end. If you're a fan of Stefan and Lauren, feel free to furiously downvote. Go for it. Let's see how many we can go for. Because that's freedom of speech, baby.
New Zealand are virtue signalling so hard to stand out and be the most PC country in the world.
What do you expect from New Zealanders? They have pulp for brains. They are all idiots.
New Zealand has gone down the toilet. Good grief. NZ is fucked. No, Paddy, NZ has not won. Jeremy is right. NZ has got played and shown up as the pack of inbred, ignorant rednecks they are. Paddy got owned intellectually. Surprise, surprise.
Wow, New Zealand and Kiwis need to be abolished/genocided. Sad to see.
Are all Kiwis this stupid and punchable?
Are New Zealanders idiots? What can you expect from a country that fucks sheep for a living? Bunch of twats. How pathetic that NZ is this narrow-minded. Down thumb, down thumb, down thumb. 10 years' time, Islam will be the dominant culture in NZ-stan, and Maori culture will be history.
Wow, New Zealand is absolutely pathetic, and Gower must have a 2-digit IQ.
NZ is fucked.